on the latest commitments from China for further opening up and reform, and the latest situation between China and the United States when it comes to trade issue, I interviewed earlier Pascal Lamy, former Director General of the World Trade Organization. Let's listen in. Mr. Lamy, welcome to CGTN.
My pleasure.
You were at the opening ceremony for the Boao Forum. Chinese President Xi Jinping has pledged a lot reform opening up. Your response?
Well, I think he announced a big package of new opening up for China. I think it's clever because he avoids to enter into a sort of bilateral trap with the US. He gives more dynamism to the Chinese economy for the years to come, and he does it in a multilateral way, which is more supportive of the WTO system, so he can try and kill two birds with one stone. Good for China, good for the rest of the world, if these measures which are announced are to be followed. In other words, if the talk is walked,
right,
then that's great news.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has also pledged, together with the measures, that these things will be done ASAP, as he said, or even within the year. Those are the key words coming from his speech. Having said that, Mr. Lamy, about the auto industry, about the IPR issue, those are the two issues many people are looking at. The auto industry, China has pledged to lower the tariffs to have cars being imported into China. But at the same time, China is also a big manufacturer of cars as well, of vehicles. So how do you see these two sides of the same issue?
Well, if China wants to open its car market, it has to do two things. One is facilitate imports in reducing tariffs. Another one is facilitate production in China by other than Chinese companies. And there is still quite a lot to do, because if you are a European company, for instance, trying to invest in China, you will have to abide to quite a large number of conditions, including choosing a local partner. The amount of equity which you can have is limited, so there are things to be done, both on the import side and also in investment facilitation. And I think this is how I understood what President Xi Jinping said, including when he said, as soon as possible, which may mean tomorrow, next year, 5 years from now. It all depends on what is possible.
He has put his credibility in this speech when it comes to the implementation of these measures. The Chinese President Xi Jinping did call on the other countries to also lower the barriers to have the technology being shared and freely shared in a way in the market rule, with the market rule rather. So he's calling on the lift of embargoes of technologies from one country, for example, from the EU countries where you're coming from, to China. We see a lot of cases like that over the years, and that's contributing to the trade surplus China is having with some countries. What do you make of that?
Well, first, the Chinese surplus is shrinking, medium and long term, which is a good thing, which, by the way, is what we all thought would happen. So I don't have any problem with the Chinese surplus being 1.5% of GNP. I would have had a problem if the Chinese surplus was 10% of GNP. And by the way, EU itself has quite a large trade surplus, so we shouldn't throw stones in a glass house. Now, you're correct.
So you don't think the U.S. trade surplus issue is the right issue that U.S. should push right now?
Absolutely not. I think the reasons why U.S. have a structural long-term trade deficit have to do with U.S. macroeconomics. The U.S. people spend a lot and save little. The Chinese people spend less and save a lot. This is why you have this surplus deficit. Now, back to your question about technology export. It's true that we have defense military reservations about selling military usable technology to China that comes from the defense agreements
Not
which
just
we have in the
military, but
West.
dual use as well. So when it comes to dual use, things are getting very tricky, and the list could be very long. You may know that very well as the head of the WTO.
Absolutely. Although we all recognize in WTO that there is a possibility to limit trade for reasons of security and defense. There is
so you don't think the European countries should do anything? You only think China should do everything?
I'm not saying the thing should be unbalanced, because I'm sure China has its own defense and security.
The question
components.
is, Mr. Lamy,
the question is whether we and China can interpret these dual use issues in a common way, and that's something which must be done in sitting around the table.
One of the things about the trade issue is that countries have to make efforts of their own in order to have their own sets of reform and opening up. I think that has been said repeatedly by many important figures this year at the Boao Forum. On the one hand, having others' market to open. On the other hand, have your own markets open, while at the same time try to push forward with more shared responsibilities and shared future. Mr. Lamy, do you think the EU is ready? Do you think the trading blocs and the trading countries are ready?
I mean, I know, I'm not speaking for the EU, but I know that when we nearly got to this deal in 2008 in the WTO to finish the Doha round, EU accepted the deal, China accepted the deal. The ones that refused the deal were not EU or China, it was India and US.
All right. Mr. Lamy, what do you think after this, after Boao Forum? How do you see the blueprint likely to be implemented when it comes to trade, when it comes to opening up not just China, but also the countries that we think are important in this whole picture of discussion? For example, the United States and the EU countries.
I hope that what has been discussed here and what has been announced by President Xi will be enforced, will be implemented, thus leading to an easing of the tensions which we've had in recent weeks, which I was very worried about.
Mr. Lamy, what a pleasure to see you here.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much, sir.
Very good.